Hello, this is Sister Laura Grady. I am happy to tell you the Georgia story. It's a fine story, but the date is June the 5th, 2016. This was Sister Mary Lou Bosler's idea, and I wish to thank her for that. She is doing the recording here at Nazareth. This story has been written before by Sister Rose de Lima Nicole and Sister Rose Margaret Schweers, in depth. But in spite of this, the Georgia leaf seems to be missing from the community genealogical tree. And this is a very small attempt to put a twig on one of its branches so that that leaf can grow. The archives do have the story, but it remains there in undisturbed slumber. This is a real story. It has characters, setting, plot, heroes, villains, tragedy, resolution, everything that a good story has. The story I know is what I have found out from resources and from Sister Mary Ellen Jones and Sister Loretta Costa. So I will start at the beginning, a very good place to start, as the song says. Bishop Augustine Verreau, Bishop of St. Augustine in Florida after the Civil War, saw the predicament of the freedmen, as they were called back then, who could not read nor know Christianity. He went to France, to his hometown of Le Puy, where he knew the Sisters of St. Joseph, and asked if they would send sisters to St. Augustine to educate and evangelize the freed slaves. In 1866, 8 sisters from Le Puy came to St. Augustine. Apparently they were successful, as a year later, in 1867, again at the request of Bishop Verreau, 3 sisters and 2 American postulants arrived in Savannah, Georgia, with the same mission to educate and evangelize. The names of the professed sisters deserved to be mentioned here. The Carondelet sisters will not know them. Sisters Julie Roussel, Mary Josephine Delage, and Marie Joseph Cordial. A few months later, Mother Helene Guidon came from Le Puy to join them. The school for black children and former slaves began to flourish. By 1868, the school for adult Negroes was operating with 120 adult students. The building, purchased by Bishop Verreau, was built in 1819 by the famed English architect William J. The building today, called the Scarborough House, is a Savannah tourist attraction. Unfortunately, though, not because we were there. One source says that the lack of financial support by the fine people of Savannah, this mission only lasted 8 months. During these years, there were many orphans in Savannah due to the Civil War. Now, a new bishop named Ignatius Persico asked our sisters if we would assist in the care of the orphan boys. The girls would be cared for by the Sisters of Mercy. He established the Barry Male Orphanage, later known as St. Thomas Vocational School. There, the boys learned basic educational skills, I believe up to the 8th grade, and a trade. This school lasted until the early 40s, as I remember it as a very young child on Havisham Street. It was at this time that he obtained permission to separate the Savannah group from the St. Augustine group. However, correspondence indicates that this separation did not affect the emotional or spiritual connection between the sisters. time passes. 9 years later, Bishop William Gross was appointed the bishop of the now Diocese of Savannah. Apparently, he was less enamored of the sisters and their works than the predecessors. He changed our history in two significant ways. In 1876, there was a serious outbreak of yellow fever in Savannah. Bishop Gross moved the orphan boys and the sisters to central Georgia, Wilkes County, where a group of well-to-do farmers from Maryland had settled before the Civil War. The mission for caring of orphans in Washington, Georgia, the name of the seat of Wilkes County, lasted until all moved to Atlanta, I think in 1969, to a new facility. The second thing he did was to demand that the Sisters of St. Joseph separate from their mother house in Lepuy and become a diocesan community, yes, under his jurisdiction. This meant that the Georgia Sisters would change from being a community of pontifical right to one of being diocesan right under the charge of the bishop. In May 1874, he gave the sisters 24 hours to decide whether they would change or leave the diocese. As a result of this, Sister Josephine Delarge left and returned to St. Augustine and ultimately to Lepuy. The rest remained. 2 large wooden buildings in the style of the times were built soon for the orphans and one for the academy for young ladies. This academy, known as St. Joseph Academy, has an interesting history. Meanwhile, because there was no Catholic education for boys in Atlanta, a boys' boarding school was established in Locust Grove, a short distance from Washington. This school remained open until 1946, when Sister Mary Aurelia MacDonald shut the doors. Many prominent Atlanta businessmen were graduates. One of them grew up to own the Atlanta transit system. As a result, anyone wearing a religious habit or clerical garb could ride free anywhere in Atlanta. I had the privilege of doing so in 1957. Soon, St. Joseph's Academy for Young Ladies began a long and successful life. Early in its existence, a young lady from Canton, Ohio, entered the novitiate in Washington. She was Miss Ella Trout, a cousin of this Bishop William Gross. Ella was 27 or 28 years old, unmarried, and an experienced high school teacher. As a second-year novice, she ran the academy with amazing success. Under her guidance, the school flourished and enrollment increased. The only Catholic education available to girls in South Georgia was in Savannah, St. Vincent's Academy, run by the Sisters of Mercy, my alma mater. So the Washington boarding school filled a need, especially for the Catholics of Augusta. In 1910, under Sister Sacred Heart's Trout, her religious name now is Sister Sacred Heart, the academy was accredited by the University of Georgia, the only school, or the first school, to be so in the state. 2 years later, in 1912, it was affiliated with the Catholic University in Washington, D.C. What a gift Sister Sacred Heart was. However, divine providence had other plans. After after 36 years of achievement and prosperity, the academy and the convent burned to the ground. Mercifully, there were no tragedies because it was a daytime fire. There were 90 girls enrolled in the academy at the time. The younger students were sent home, but 18 students remained in order to graduate and receive their diplomas. So, 18 seniors and 5 sisters moved into a large house in Augusta, lent to them, called the Dickey Cottage, which was not a cottage at all. Can you imagine 23 women living in the house when bathrooms were not plentiful in that era? A Methodist church now stands on the site. The sisters were Mother Aloysius Burke, Sisters Sacred Heart Trout, Mary Louise Welts, Raphael Mulroy, and Ambrose Finnegan. But again, God had plans. The Augusta City Fathers offered the Sisters of St. Joseph 5 acres of prime property on Wrightsboro Road, together with some financial assistance to build a school for young ladies in Augusta. The convent and the boys' orphanage remained in Washington, Georgia. The building, now a part of the VA hospital, is an imposing structure of 3 stories with Ionic Greek columns supporting its imposing entrance. The cornerstone was laid July 6, 1913, and the school's new name, Mount St. Joseph, befitted its hill location and its patron. The address is still 2426 Wrightsboro Road in Augusta. Its cost was about $280,000 in 1913 money. Today, think several million. 2 years later, the new mount opened on September 9, 1915. It prospered, but only for a short time, because, again, God had plans. Once more, tragedy struck. In 1916, the Irish-American Bank failed. That was the official story. The reality, according to Sister Rose Margaret Schweers, whose 2 older sisters were enrolled in the school, and I quote, is, the sisters lost their finances and were left with a hefty debt, largely because of a dishonest man, read thief, who stole the money. Sister Loretta Costa claims that somehow the Ku Klux Klan was involved. The new Mount St. Joseph now belonged to the Mercantile Bank in St. Louis. How ironic. Since Augusta had now become the provincial house housed on Wrightsboro Road, this caused the sisters to be literally homeless. Where was the bishop? Sister Gabriel Hines took matters into her own hands and called her niece, Mrs. Katie Flannery Sims, for help. Mrs. Sims was a graduate of St. Joseph's Academy in Washington and loved the sisters. Eventually, she would become the cousin of world-famous novelist Flannery O'Connor. To make a long story short, Mrs. Sim purchased the Chateau Levert, the beautiful home of Victoria Walton Levert, whose ancestor was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. Mount St. Joseph and the sisters now had a new address, 1218 Montesano Avenue, Augusta. Like the phoenix rising from the flames, the newborn academy again prospered under the guidance of Sister Sacred Heart. When she died in 1921, Sister Rose de Lima Nicole replaced her as principal until 1939. To backtrack a bit, sometime after World War I, the Georgia legislature enacted one of its most shameful laws. These laws reflected the prejudice and suspicion of a mostly uneducated and poorly educated rural citizens. Most of them had never even met a Catholic, much less a religion. The law required that every convent in the state of Georgia be subject to inspection by a committee known as the Vici men. I do not know what the Vici word means. They opened every door on every floor. It was being gossiped around that they were looking for girls being held against their will and tunnels connecting the convent to the rectory. The committee was composed of three: a Catholic, a Protestant, and a Jewish man. Sister Rose Margaret's brother served on this committee to prevent lies being told about the sisters. As the years went on, the committee died of embarrassment. In 1922, the Georgia province affiliated with Carondelet as a province. This meant a restoration to pontifical right, some changes in habits, mostly involving pleats, a gimp that was a bit smaller, some customs and prayers. I knew two sisters who were still living in 1954 when I returned to Georgia after the novitiate. It was hard, they said, but necessary. The Georgia province functioned well through the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s with 80 to 90 sisters. Schools flourished, and it was a time of growth. Schools were established in Brunswick, Atlanta, Savannah, Valdosta, Marietta, Milledgeville. Remember, the Catholic population of the state was less than 3%. However, it gradually became apparent that the novices needed professional education to keep up with the changing educational standards. So, sisters went to Fontbonne for summer courses, thus meeting some of the St. Louis sisters. As a result of this connection, the Georgia Provincial decided to send novices to Carondelet for better religious and educational training. So in May 1944, Sister Mary John Dillard moved into the Carondelet novitiate, followed in 1945 by Sisters Victoria Marie Ogilvie, Pauline Achin, and Mary Vincent Holford. Sister Thomas Margaret Small, a native of Atlanta already in the novitiate, joined the group and returned with them to Georgia. For many years, the need of a Catholic hospital in Augusta was apparent. But since the Medical College of Georgia was located there, and where doctors, nurses, and auxiliary medical professionals were trained, many citizens thought another hospital was not needed. But a group of prominent citizens of all faiths with deeper than usual pockets began the fundraising. They made the dream come true in December 1951 when St. Joseph's Hospital opened its doors to all who came, including the segregated African Americans. Sister Mary Louise Herman was the administrator for over 20 years. She became well beloved. She cared for the patients, visited them, and even sat up with dying patients all night long. The new St. Joseph's Hospital, incidentally, was also located on Wrightsboro Road, within walking distance of our former academy, now the Uptown VA, and it grew and flourished and was in the early 1990s enlarged for more beds. Sister Mary Caroline Sanford procured the land with the help of a dedicated committee and also the architect. The entire city, even people from around the area, contributed funds. Our own Sister Clara Vincent Latinsky was there as a nurse and later a certified chaplain for 49 years. The chapel remains today and is named the Sister Clara Vincent Slatinsky Chapel. Local priests take turns saying a weekly mass at noon, and many ordinary people, young and old, attend. In 2006, Ascension Health sold the hospital to a group called Triad. Financial difficulties, mostly because Blue Cross paid the hospital 32 cents on the dollar, and other government regulations caused this. Today, the hospital is again on track, called Trinity Hospital. In 1961, the Georgia province melded into the St. Louis province, and our story could stop there, not ending its mission, but strengthening it. Many young C.S.Js came south to teach, staff the hospital, and care for the orphans at a new facility in Atlanta. Georgia sisters accepted missions throughout Missouri, Illinois, Michigan, Colorado, and even Hawaii. So the Georgia province of 94 years remains absent from the congregational genealogical tree. It is hoped that this story will provide a small twig for the Georgia leaf to grow. Thank you.